thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thanks for joining us today. Visit online at wallbuilders.com and wallbuilderslive.com, especially wallbuilderslive.com today. If for some reason you're tuning in first time this week, yesterday and the day before, we talked about Godonomics. This is a three-part series. We're going to wrap it up today on day 3. There's so much more here than we could possibly cover in 3 days, so we encourage you to visit Godonomics.com for more information. The author of Godonomics, Chad Hovind, is with us for the third day in a row. Chad, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, we covered a lot of ground the first 2 days, but I still feel like we're just scratching the surface. You've got in the Godonomics workbook and DVD series 6 major lessons where you ask of all kinds of questions, but you talk about, what would God actually say to Adam Smith? What would he say to John Keynes, to FDR, to Alan Greenspan, to Karl Marx, and to the IRS? And then within each of those chapters, you cover a ton of information about even just the concept of profit and socialism versus capitalism and all these things. And we've kind of scratched the surface on many of these the last 2 days. But today, let's go a little bit further and let's dive in even a little bit deeper in terms of the concepts of money and our personal savings. I love how you closed out yesterday about the importance of us personally getting our house in order. Judgment begins in the house of God, and making sure that we get a handle on our finances and our attitude towards money before we're ever going to be able to elect people that are going to get the nation in order as well, which kind of takes us to that last chapter. What would God say to the Internal Revenue Service?
Well, as I mentioned, I think yesterday, the important part of the IRS is the idea that begrudging giving never changes the human heart. It just never does. And whenever you have a government coming in and telling you must give, or that there's a different percentage for one person versus another person, or one group can pull political favors, it ends up with corruption. I love what for the book Forgotten Man. It talks about person A, B, and C. If person A is in need and person B and C have money, then person B and C can assess that need and choose to be generous. But what happens is when person B sees person A in need and turns to person C, puts a gun to their head and says, you must give to person A, and by the way, give me some money for this great service I just provided, you end up with trouble. And that's what happens is when government comes in and puts a gun to one group's head and says you must give to another group, then the government becomes an agent of tyranny that can be bribed, basically. And what happens is, you bring Democrats in power, and they hire the government to say, you, the government, need to make the corporations give to us, A, the unions. Then, a group of Republicans get in play, and they say, hey, we own this big business, we gave to you, you, the government, person B, put a gun to the taxpayer's head, and you must bail us out as a corporation, even though we made bad decisions. So what happens is, whenever you have tyranny through history, it's when you move away from the rule of law and you move away from this idea of all people equally are under the same rules and guidelines, so that we're all incentivized to fix broken laws and to operate fairly under laws that are, a justice for all.
Let's back up to what you were saying in terms of giving cheerfully when it's your choice and helping others. Tell me if you agree with this. I've felt like for a while, as I fought hard politically to reduce the size of government, get government its proper jurisdiction, all those things, that this has got to be a two-pronged approach. While we're fighting politically to get back to a constitutional republic, we also have got to get the church and individuals within the church to be willing to give even while that tax burden's high, so that we can have the programs within our church to meet the needs of the community so that we can reduce government. Because we've gotten into this cycle where government got so big, it's taken so much of our paychecks, we can't afford to give the extra money above and beyond our tithe. Therefore, the church can't afford to do the programs that it used to do to take care of the poor. So how do we beat that cycle and do both at once?
Well, again, I do think it starts individually. How can each one of us say, there's an incredible, powerful principle that will make you not only more generous, but actually happier in your life, and that's margin. we always live on the edge. We spend everything we have. We pack up our calendars. We just always live on the edge. So saying, I want to have some margin. Margin means I'm going to purposely, even though the mortgage agent says that I can afford X size house, I'm going to purposely go 20% less than that, so I have extra money for giving, extra money for saving. Instead of upgrading my car every 3 years, I'm going to upgrade it every 7 years. I mean, for me, I'm 40. I have never owned a new TV in my life until last year. They happened to have a plasma screen on sale for $150. And I went, oh, well, then I'm ready to do that. My dad was like Mr. Thrift. My kids are 16, 14, and 4, and they love going to thrift stores. Every time we go on vacation, hey, can we go on a thrift store? Because we've just said that's a value. There's this value of thrift and creativity. It doesn't mean that, you don't own nice stuff. It just means you get very creative on how to get the best price and value. And you say, hey, margin is important to me, and it brings freedom into your family.
I love it. So even with the outlandish tax burdens that we have today, there's still room for us as individuals to spend less, to downgrade a little bit and still enjoy life, still enjoy fine things, but just shave a little bit, create a little bit of a margin there so that when that person in your church has, as we talked about either yesterday or day before, a real burden, not just their normal load, but a real burden hits them, that you're in a position to chip in a couple $100 or $1,000 to help with that burden. What a difference, and what joy it would bring to be in that position and then get to help.
Yeah, and keep in mind there's two ways to do it. I mean, one way is, spend less than you make, and that's good. Spend less than you make, so work on your expenditures. The other way is to make more than you spend. I mean, many of us have hobbies. We have stuff sitting around the house in our garages. We could be making more money. We could sell all the stuff that's taking up space. We need to sell the storage unit. Like, why in the world are we paying monthly to store our junk? Yeah. We need to instead sell all that stuff, stop spending so much, but also make more. I mean, my daughter and I walked into a Texas Roadhouse, and we saw a balloon artist. I've been a balloon artist my whole life. I've taught my daughter how to do balloon art. And I said, honey, why don't you go over and see if she needs help? And sure enough, that was about 2 years ago, and now, about once a month she goes over and performs, and she works for tips, and I think she's making $20+ an hour. And just she found a way to use a gift and a talent and a passion she had to make money. And many of us have these untapped ways to make more than we have. We've never really thought about it. And I would just say there are ways to spend less than you make, but there's also ways to make more than you spend.
And then you're in a position to help and reduce that burden within the community. And also, in fact, when we come back from the break, I don't even remember if you covered this in the program or not, but talk about how to help turn those that are on the receiving side of government into producers, and how churches can have a concentrated effort on that. Back in a moment, Chad Hovind is our guest. Godonomics.com is the website. Go there to find out more. We'll be back in a moment on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Federal courts have made several amazing rulings recently, ordering the removal of a cross from a cemetery, banning religious holiday displays, removing the Ten Commandments from public view, prohibiting student prayers whether verbal or silent, and numerous other similar restrictive rulings. As one current justice has noted, the Supreme Court has now become, quote, a national board of theology. Our founding fathers would be astounded. They designed the First Amendment to keep the federal courts completely out of this issue. As Thomas Jefferson forcefully declared, I consider the federal government as prohibited by the Constitution from meddling with religious exercises. The First Amendment was designed to keep decisions on religious expression out of the federal courts and in the hands of the local communities.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on WallBuilders Live. Chad Hovind with us, talking about Godonomics, the website, Godonomics.com. As we were going to the break, Chad, I was just curious about this. How do you get more people that are on the receiving end right now that maybe it's not a burden situation, they're just not carrying their load? We've got obviously the generational welfare problem in America. Can we turn that around quickly if we are willing to do some of the things like what Bradford did when he said, hey, no more just getting whatever you want out of the storehouse, you got to go work and produce? do you think a lot of those that right now are just receiving would be willing to work? And maybe take that even into your individual church and what you'd say to pastors today. How do you preach on that subject to encourage the people within your church to be producers?
Yeah, well, I do think it's very hard to break generational poverty. So I'd start with that. You need to have a very realistic view, having seen it in both Chicago and down in Atlanta and here in Cincinnati. When you are working with folks who maybe have never had a job and have never known parents who've ever had a job, their view of reality is just different. So the idea of just get a job is almost naive, and the idea of a government handout is also naive. So it's going to take relationships. For example, here in Cincinnati, we're working with a group called CityLink, and it is a one-stop shop center for the working poor, where churches are sending volunteers down, and we're working directly with people every week. Hey, did you make 5 calls about your resume? Here's how you put a resume together. Hey, you need to let me show you how you dress for a resume. There's dentists who are giving free dental care down there. Doctors are going to be providing free medical services. And it's really a one-stop shop to help the working poor get to the next level, but through the context of relationship, where Christ followers say, hey, I love you. I want to help you see that your life can be more than you even know right now. I want to sort of give you some patterns and almost be both a friend and a parent that you never had to help you move to the next level.
So then it's not just handing out a check. It's actually building a relationship and meeting their real needs.
Yeah, and there's definitely tangible things coming out of that. But the main thing is, how do you work towards self-sufficiency? I was just in Africa working with Compassion this last month. And I was amazed to see how they're working with thousands and thousands of children. And it's not just support them with a check. It was also, we went into little villages and saw kids being trained on how to sew. Another place where the kids were learning how to build chairs and work with craftsman tools. And went into another place they're learning how to put beads together. And all across the sides of the building it said self-sufficiency. How do we work people towards self-sufficiency? Here's the desired outcome. And I was amazed to see it wasn't just about supporting them for years, but how do we set them up with skills so that they can provide for themselves later and give back to others? So to me, that's the mindset we want to have, which is that dependency is not liberty. Self-sufficiency leads to liberty and generosity. So we need to really think about that and make sure that we're putting into our giving, into our planning, into our decision-making as a church, are we putting matrix in place to help people? Like, we have several folks who are financially very viable and smart with their money, and so when we have somebody who's in a financial situation, we don't just write a check. We might give a temporary relief, but then we say, hey, you need to sit down with some friends here, and they want to help work you through. Look inward, look backward, look forward. How did you get into this situation, and how do we make some different patterns so that this changes?
I got to get you to
in relationship.
I got to get you to repeat that. The dependency is not liberty. Self-sufficiency leads to liberty, and what was the other one?
And generosity.
And generosity. Self-sufficiency leads to liberty and generosity. That is powerful, bro. That should guide a lot of what we do with our programs. Okay, and I love where you're headed with this, and I want to talk more about CityLink because that sounds like a great solution I'd love to see happen in my own backyard and maybe something we can export around the nation. So stay with us, folks. Back in a moment, Chad Hovind, our guest. We're talking Godonomics. How do we address money, economics, all of these issues from a biblical point of view? The Bible has so much to say about these issues. We've ignored it for too long. We got to get it applied in our own lives and in our nation. Check it out at Godonomics.com. Back in a moment on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Revisions today often assert that our founding fathers were atheists or agnostics or deists. This charge is not new. In fact, Patrick Henry was even called a deist in his lifetime. Clearly, no one could question his patriotism, but Henry was hurt that they would question his Christianity. Against the charge that he was a deist, Patrick Henry thundered, "Deism, with me, is but another name for vice and depravity. I hear it is said by the deists that I am one of their number, and indeed, that some good people think I am no Christian. This thought gives me much more pain than being called a traitor. Being a Christian is a character which I prize far above all this world has or can boast." Patrick Henry was quick to refute the charge of deism and to declare his open belief as a Christian.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on WallBuilders Live. Chad Hovind still with us. It's a 3-day program. If you just tuned in, you've missed a whole lot of material. You want to go to wallbuilderslive.com and download those programs from yesterday and the day before. You're going to love it. It's going to equip you. It's going to empower you. It's going to give you the ability to help turn things around in your community and your church right there and your own family. And we obviously start with ourselves. Some great principles here that I want to implement. Chad, there's so many things you just get caught up in society and the way things have just been done for decades. That's why I'm so glad to see so much of this teaching to get us back to a biblical perspective on this. But I got to bring you back to what you were talking about before the break there with CityLink. So this is sounds like a partnership of churches then. It's not necessarily a government program. It's the churches coming together?
Yep, churches came together, and multiple churches with sort of led by a church with a pastor friend of mine named Brian Tome, who sort of brought the group together, church about 18,000, and then several of us, churches of differing sizes, ours about 4,000, joined together and said, let's not only help build this thing, but figure out how to put the infrastructure in place, and then how to mobilize volunteers, especially professionals who, it's great to go to a third world country and build a house, but many folks are doctors and lawyers, and there's many folks in our current community, our Jerusalem and Judea, who need, good, cheaper legal assistance or need dental work done. So why have to go over to the third country to do it? Let's do it right here in our own backyard. So it's a chance for people to serve, use their gifts, make a difference, and also to really impact and make a difference in our city.
So and it sounded like, too, you were talking about even training them on resumes and getting jobs and connecting them with people.
Yeah, I've got lots of entrepreneurs in our church. I'll give you another example. This is down near CityLink. A guy in our church is working with P&G. We have a lot of P&G folks at our church, and he decided to start a company that distributed a couple different products that sort of are household names. And he decided in the warehouse to only employ people who were working poor and specifically had just got out of prisons. And so, of course, he had a job training program in it, and there was some checks and balances. There was some accountability, but he really wanted to create a way to give a factory job. I think there's 100 last year, and they're upping the workforce to 200 this year.
Wow. To
really give folks a chance to be involved in taking the next step, build those relationships. And so there's a lot of entrepreneurs doing that. They're saying, we want to help. Over the Rhine is our difficult part of Cincinnati. We want to make a difference in Over the Rhine by providing jobs for folks that are going to set them up for self-sufficiency in a way that, we could probably make more money if we did it a different way, but we feel like, being salt and light in the community is just as important as making a profit.
How do you, and this is a little bit off track, I guess, but in those situations in your own church or in CityLink or wherever you go, where do you draw the line on, as we talked about earlier, the load and the burden and whether, when to help and when to actually, I don't know any other way to say it, but cut people off and say you're just gaming the system and you're not actually being willing to work? And when do you just meet the need in front of you? I mean, how do you decide in those situations?
Well, I think it's a case-by-case basis, and I think that's one of the reasons, when you look at, this isn't a promo for compassion, but one of the things that impacted me about compassion is, as I looked at their work in Africa, is it's all done through the local church, because what they realize is that the local church has the ability to assess on a case-by-case basis. The problem is when you make sweeping generalizations, you assume all poor are the same, you assume all people are the same, and you turn people into cogs in a wheel. But we're not cogs in a wheel, we're living stones, and so I think you have to look at each situation uniquely and say, hey, what does this particular person need? It might be education, it might be a friend, it might be how to write a resume, it might be, hey, you need to show up on time at work. I mean, as weird as that sounds, if you've never seen anyone do it, you need a friend who's trusted to tell you this kind of stuff because you never had parents who taught it to you. So I think it's a case-by-case system, and I think that's why a grassroots method is so much better than a sort of faceless bureaucracy where you're always a number. I mean, you're literally a number, a Social Security number, and nobody knows your story, and nobody knows if you're gaming the system. And I can't remember the recent numbers, but the amount of fraud and the amount of waste, it's always shocking, but it was like more shocking than ever. Yeah,
it's unreal, and it's because it just cannot work. There is no way for government to be as efficient with the dollars or as effective with the people as private philanthropy. And I know I've heard Barton talk about 30% of your dollar through government actually gets to the people in need, but when you do it with private entity and philanthropy, it's twice as much, it's 60%, and it's for all the reasons that you just mentioned, and it's just common sense, but we have to step up in the church and create those programs and do the things that you're talking about that are happening right there in your community and your church. Got to take one more break. We're going to have our final segment with Chad Hovind on Godonomics. Don't miss it. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders, and I know you hear my dad and Rick talk a lot about our founding fathers, about the original intent of our nation, the constitutional heritage that we have, and really we've seen how far we've slipped away from that. And I know a lot of us, as we hear my dad and Rick talk, think, I wish there was a place that I could go and I could see these documents, that I could read and learn about the founding fathers firsthand, see the things they did. And I want to give you some websites today that can help you accomplish that very thing. If you get online, you can go to places like Library of Congress, and you can look under their Century of Lawmaking or historical documents. You can go to the Avalon Project, to the Founders Constitution, to Google Books, or even the Internet Archives, or you can just go to WallBuilders' website. We have a section for our library, and under that section we have different subgroups for historical documents, historical writings, even a place where you can get helpful links to find out more information about other websites where you can do research for yourself and find the truth for yourself. Friends, this is a time that we need to know who we are and where we came from. WallBuilders.com is a great place to go.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Our last 5 minutes with Chad Hovind. Chad, it's been so great having you the last couple of days. I've learned so much, and I know our listeners have as well. Want to encourage them to find out more information at Godonomics.com. In these final few minutes with you, just give me kind of your reasoning for doing this. As a pastor, why did you get into economics? What are you hoping to accomplish with these programs and educating people on Godonomics?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what it was. I was actually reading the book of Judges. I was doing a series at the time, and I heard the parable of Jotham. Jotham, if you remember, his dad was Gideon, and he sees all of his brothers killed off by Abimelech, I believe. And he's shocked that nobody does anything about it. And he runs into town instead of hiding, and he tells a parable. He tells a parable about a forest that was looking for a leader, and the oil-producing trees were too busy to get involved. The vineyard was too busy making wine, and therefore the thorn bush ended up in charge. And the thorn bush said, the bramble said, if you don't put me in charge, I'm going to burn the place down. And I thought, you know what? That's what happens when good people get too busy doing good things. They don't get involved in public policy. They don't get involved in public leadership. And what happens is you end up having a thorn bush ruling your city, your country, your state. And that might be a blue thorn bush or a red thorn bush. But ultimately, if you don't have good people who aren't involved in political discourse and economics and training themselves in it, able to explain it in a convincing way to those who are unconvinced, you're going to end up with a bad situation. And so I looked at all the resources out there, and I realized there's really nothing out there that explains why capitalism is not just a good idea, it's God's idea, that free enterprise leads to liberty, productivity, and generosity. So there's lots of Dave Ramsey's and places like that, but there was nothing that really addressed this worldview macro issue. So originally it was a sermon series. It turned into a DVD series for homeschoolers and for churches to use for those who weren't trained in economics. I made it inherently biblical, so you didn't feel like you were bringing the agenda to the table, but still really teaching the Bible. And then it turned into a book, which, as you mentioned, several folks have said nice things about, Glenn Beck and David Barton and Huckabee and others. And that actually has about 90% new material in it that wasn't in the original DVD series, so people could supplement that and catch up to, hey, what's some new pieces on this and ways to teach it. So that parable so impacted me that I need to get out of the woods and I need to get involved and use my gifts as a teacher, as an edutainer, to teach these things in a way that were very palatable and reproducible.
I love it, man, and I think it is such a good tool for helping us choose leaders, even though that may not be. I don't think you necessarily say that in the DVD set, but it equips us with the right perspective on what works and doesn't work. And so when we got candidates standing in front of us or commercials on television and they're saying, I'm going to bring this, I'm going to do this through government, as a result of your program, you really have a paradigm to look through to say, wait a minute, that's not Godonomics, that's socialism. That's not going to work. We want biblical economics that'll give us good results. So you're actually helping us to choose our, not only get our own financial house in order, but be able to choose leaders that will get our nation's house in order.
Yeah, and also, economics sounds so complicated, but as you've seen, when you go through the DVD, you're like, this isn't complicated at all.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the minute you hear somebody saying the government ought to spend something, you can immediately look at that flow chart I put together and say, okay, but where will it come from? Do I want the government to debauch the currency? Do I want them to enslave us to debt? Or do I want them to destroy job growth? Oh, that's a problem. It doesn't matter how good the program is. We're broke.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt, man. Great stuff. You did a fantastic job. I love the workbook. Like I said, I'm visual, so I like having all those pictures in there and graphs and charts to make it easy to understand. But, we got a lot of work cut out for us to get folks educated on these things. Encourage our listeners to find out more at Godonomics.com. Chad, keep up the great work, man. I'm so excited about the impact that this can have. As you and I have talked about our youth leadership program, Patriot Academy, I want every one of those young people to go through your program. I just think it's important for us to equip ourselves with this information so we can choose our leaders wisely. We're not going to change things overnight, but we can change things over time if we just start making better decisions. Our mutual friend Bob McEwen, always says there's nothing wrong with our country that the right leadership can't fix. And the principles that you've laid out in Godonomics, Congressman McEwen would say they only work every single time they're tried. So let's go out there and try. Chad, God bless you, brother. Thanks for all your hard work.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate your time. Folks, if you just tuned in today and caught us, this is a 3-part series. All 3 parts are now available at wallbuilderslive.com. You can take those and email them out and share them with your friends and family on Facebook. We encourage you to do that. Let's get folks educated about biblical concepts, biblical truths about how we should spend our money, how we should be productive, how we should go out and work hard, and then what to do with that money once we make it, and the kind of leaders we should choose in our nation. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
Stand under